Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Simplify Your Financial Life podcast. I'm Adam Lawrence, and today we're joined by a very special guest, Nina Needleman, who's an expert in many things, especially in her field of financial planning. And today she's going to be breaking down the deep connection between love and money for us and how we can navigate this complex area of personal finance. Welcome, Nina. We're so excited to have you on the show.
Thanks, Adam. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, listen, I always love to share the bio so our viewers could get to know you a little better. So, author Nina Needleman calls herself a recovering financial advisor. I love that. She has a BA and MBA from Washington University in St. Louis. She previously held Series 7, 63, Series 8, 24, 65, and Missouri Life and Health Insurance licenses. She spent the first 3 decades of her career in the financial services industry, mostly with stock brokerages and insurance firms. This included 20 years doing marketing, training, and compliance, and 9 years working directly with individuals and families as a financial planner, helping them plan and implement their financial dreams and goals. In 2011, she stopped working as a financial planner and since then has been using her business skills to help nonprofit organizations with capacity building and, more importantly, as an educator to teach individuals about personal finance and philanthropy. Her current nonprofit work includes a whole host of initiatives from the Spirit of St. Louis Women's Fund, the Sheldon Foundation, teaching financial literacy workshops at the YWCA, initiating a capacity building scholarship for small nonprofits, and writing a monthly philanthropy column for her local newspaper. Nina sees her role now as a personal finance whisperer, helping people ask the right questions to make informed decisions to shape their financial futures. Well, that's a lot. I love that. You kind of have your hand in so many different areas. Um, but the bio I think covered a lot of great ground. But could you also share an interesting fact about yourself that's not in your bio?
Well, I'll share a fun fact. I really love Halloween and engaging my creative juices, coming up with quirky tombstones for my front yard and costumes for my occasional Halloween party.
Wow, I love that. So what are some of the quirkiest ones that you've had in past years?
Costumes, Amy Winehouse, Rocket Man, um, Beetlejuice.
Wow, I love all those actually. Amy Winehouse, I think that would be a really cool one to see. Well, awesome. That's fantastic. So, with that being said, I'd like to kick us off today to talk about the relationship between love and money, no pun intended. Valentine's Day was just behind us, and what better way to kick us off on this extremely important topic than to talk about your new book, The Financial Forevermore Workbook, a couple's financial survival guide and ways to beat the odds. Can you talk a little bit about the idea behind your workbook and what inspired you to initially put it together?
Sure. When I was meeting with couples, I found a lot of couples spent more time planning their vacations than they did planning their financial future. A lot of times couples really ducked and didn't talk about money at all, except the monthly expenses or the occasional unexpected expense. And they really hadn't articulated financial dreams or goals
Mhm.
and didn't have a plan.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a very prevalent issue, right? Especially for newlywed couples, and you're in the honeymoon phase, and you're not really thinking about that type of thing. And so it makes sense, even though it is unfortunate. It also is extremely important because of something you cite early on in the book, which is that 50% of first marriages end in divorce, and 57% of those divorced couples cited financial problems as the primary reason behind their separation. So it really just proves that getting out ahead of these issues ahead of time to make sure that you're on the same financial page as your partner is critical, not just for the relationship, but of course your finances as well. And another area you talk about in part one, you highlight a really key point, which is that when people initially get married, like we're talking about, they of course are realizing that they're committing themselves to each other in a whole host of ways, right? Physically, emotionally, spiritually, and even socially. But a lot of times they don't realize, at least on the forefront, that they're also committing themselves to each other financially as well. And I'm curious why they don't realize that in a lot of cases, and also why that aspect of their coming together and their union is so often neglected.
I think when you're in love, you focus on all the good stuff, your attraction, your shared interest, having fun, um, planning a life together. And then when you're planning a wedding, you're planning the big event. And just not thinking about anything other than that. Also, many religious leaders don't bring up or deep dive into finances. Probably with the exception of the Catholic religion, which has a nice pre-cana program. I'm not aware of other religions having a formal program. So when they get together with couples before they get married, they talk about kids, values, spiritual things, but they don't really talk about finances. And in a lot of families, they don't talk about money in front of kids, even to adult kids. They don't want to bother them. They just aren't comfortable sharing it.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that's really prevalent. It makes me think about a video I saw on social media the other day of parents sitting down with their kids once a month. They actually had four kids, four boys, and they'd sit them down at the dining room table once a month, and they would dole out their monthly budget. And these kids are not like high school kids where you would expect to have an allowance. They were like 7 or 8 years old. And so they would dole out their monthly allowance and say, hey, if you want to pay for stuff, then, you have to use your monthly allowance. And they give them the cash, and, they could buy whatever toys or video games that they have the capacity for. But one thing that the parents were talking about is that the kids' mindset started to shift whenever they were spending their own money as opposed to their parents' money, because it's a lot easier to spend money when it's not your own, right? So I think that's something that a lot of folks should start doing more of, and it really just speaks to the importance of financial literacy, which I know you teach some workshops on. But I honestly had not thought about the fact that it's not so taught in a religious setting, because oftentimes kids, I mean, that's one of the first times in their life whenever they're in an educational setting, oftentimes before preschool, they go to church or they go to temple, and they're in their Bible study classes. And if there were opportunities to dive into financial literacy somehow, I think that would be a great opportunity. So I think that's a really insightful thing to think about. But of course, one of the ways, especially, for folks that are, already in their adult lives, to improve their financial literacy is through your workbook, right? Which I love. And early on, you talk about, how you recommend that people use this workbook to their advantage. And my girlfriend and I actually took you up on your advice a few weeks ago. We actually went through it, just like you recommended. We had a nice dinner to start off with, opened up a nice bottle of wine afterwards, and then started working through the exercises. And it may seem like, hey, I'm working through financial exercises, may not be the most fun thing in the world, but honestly, we had a blast doing it, and it was extremely insightful because it didn't just give us insight into the financial side of things, but also into um, our family's personal financial histories, which you talk about a lot in part two. Can you talk a little bit about why our family experiences with money growing up have such a profound influence on how we perceive our own personal finances throughout our lives?
Sure. Kids are smart. They learn a lot from your example. What we do, they much more than what we say. Did your parents only pay cash for things that they could afford now? Or were they quick to pull out a credit card because they didn't have to pay for the whole thing this month? Often these money behaviors are sort of baked into our family history. So the behaviors of spending and saving that we grew up with seem normal to us. We don't think about it. We don't ask why.
No, I think it's an excellent example and thing to think about as well. And kind of on that same note, what would you say are some of the most influential experiences and observed behaviors from someone's family financial past growing up that'll ultimately shape how they'll think about money the rest of their lives?
Well, there's both extreme bad experiences and extreme good experiences. Bad experiences, if you had a grandparent that lived through the Depression, an aunt who doesn't trust banks because she lost money or maybe was frozen out of an account because of a missed payment, or even just the stress of debt collectors and calling when you were a kid and parents fighting over that. Good examples. My grandparents on both sides bought blue chip stocks when they had extra money. And my dad did that too. So my dad's a scientist and he bought pharmaceutical companies that he knew about through his research and understanding of clinical trials and the approval process. There's a book you and I talked about before called One Up on Wall Street, where a guy named Peter Lynch talks about this too, sort of investing in what you know. But that's a topic for another day. Another thing on the good example side is my parents wrote checks or paid cash for everything when I was growing up. They didn't use credit cards maybe until I was in high school. And then it was Sears and a gas card. I mean, I don't even remember when they started using general credit cards, but they never bought anything they couldn't afford to pay for. The only debt was the house and car. So that was sort of part of my formative years is observing that.
I think that's such an excellent point. There's a lot to unpack there. Kind of going back to the more of the negative observed behaviors or experiences in your family financial past. Especially my generation, a lot of my friends and I mean, we grew up during the 2008 Great Recession, right? And in the wake of that whole situation. And a lot of us saw, our family members and our friends and our loved ones struggle. And so obviously that is going to make us more risk averse, right? And it's a very counterintuitive type of situation with millennials and Gen Z kind of in my age group, because on the news you see things like meme stocks happening, right? You see like the GameStops of the world and the Bed Baths and Beyond of the world. But at the same time, there's some recent research that has come out that has shown that millennials and Gen Z are one of the most risk-averse generations of any generation in history. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that, they were in their toddler years basically, and then the 2008 Great Recession happened. They didn't really truly understand what was happening at that time, but they saw that their parents were struggling. Probably, kids are smart, like you said. They understand these things even if they don't really grasp the concepts behind what's happening. And then, fast forward to a decade later, and then we have COVID, right? And the shutdown and the recession that followed after that. So that makes a lot of sense. But then, like you said, it can also be a double-edged sword, right? It can be something good where if your parents, don't have a lot of credit card debt, then, that's something that you're going to understand should be paid off every month, and hopefully you won't get into debt. Another really intriguing concept that you touch on is, the financial role model, right? And you talk about you can pick someone that can either be within your family, outside of your family, or potentially both. And some pretty cool ones that you mentioned that stuck out to me were Beyonce, Taylor Swift, who just became a billionaire. She would be an excellent financial role model to have, right? And some business moguls are in there, like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, or even Bill Gates, just to name a few. So I'm curious, who's your financial role model and how should people identify one for themselves?
Well, obviously my parents are my role models, but also, looking at, Taylor Swift gave $100,000 after the Kansas City uh, shooting the other day. That was so cool. And Dolly Parton, Dolly Parton has established a huge education program where she provides books to newborns or something. I don't remember exactly, but her book program has provided something like 3 million books for poor kids. I mean, I love that, using your resources and your reach to do something impactful and to be a role model. I just love that.
That's excellent. It makes me also think about one of my dad's favorite things to tell me growing up, which he'd always like to tell me about the giving pledge. which I believe Bill Gates and Warren Buffett started like 2 decades ago or 3 decades ago or so. And
Mhm.
the concept is, hey, we're some of the richest people in the world, and we want to give away basically 100% of our wealth by the time that we die. And so far, Warren Buffett is making good on that promise, even though he's such an excellent investor that his net worth is still growing at basically a faster pace than he can give it away. And same thing for Bill Gates. But I think that that makes a lot of sense. Folks that can do well throughout their careers, but then also give it away. I think that those are excellent role models to have as well. But once folks have identified a financial role model for themselves and have gained that understanding of their financial history of their family and the money and how it's shaped their own financial views, then they can start to look at their own financial habits as a couple, right? So, what would you say are some recurring themes that you've seen throughout your career when it comes to married couples' financial habits?
Well, typically one's a spender and one's a saver, you know. And, as we said before, couples just haven't had sort of a deep financial discovery discussion. And a lot of time, one partner doesn't know about the debt of another.
Yeah, no, it's really fascinating to see because both of us are financial planners, and we've probably seen this a bunch of times, right? Um, one person is the spender, one person is the saver, and so there may be some differences in financial compatibility there, which you also mentioned in the book. If there is that di- uh, the differing financial compatibility, are they doomed, or are there ways to navigate and work through that kind of dynamic?
They are not doomed. But, you know, part of the education process here and the communication is, first recognize your needs. You got to pay your mortgage, you got to pay utilities, food, you know, and then extra money goes to wants. And so that's where the discussion has to occur. Usually they agree you got to get the needs covered, but um, you know, can you take turns on the big stuff? One year we go on a big vacation because you want it. The next year, let's do that bathroom renovation that's important to me, you know. But even for smaller dollar decisions, save $500 or whatever's small to you, take turns by the month or have discussion about it. You don't want to be surprised when you open a credit card bill and find out the other person bought something you didn't know about.
No, I couldn't agree more. And actually, in one of my financial planning textbooks the other day, I read there's a concept of financial infidelity, which is
Mhm.
something that that term comes up quite a bit these days, because things have gotten more expensive than ever, and especially let's say the breadwinner of the household feels that they can't afford things as much anymore. They can't afford the big vacation that their spouse has been counting on them for since they got married, and so they start to kind of tell lies about their financial situation. And so, like you said, being candid with your partner, being honest about the situation. Hey, maybe we either can't take that vacation this year, or maybe we're just going to have to take a road trip let's say if we live here in Texas, from Houston to Austin, as opposed to, going to Japan and going to Tokyo for a month, right? Making some of those more realistic vacation decisions. So that makes a lot of sense. Kind of in the same vein, what would you say are some of the biggest financial mistakes that most couples make?
Oh, before I answer that, to follow up on the other navigation question, I have in my workbook a commitment letter on page 58 that says, I, Adam, commit to limit my purchases to X amount, and I, Jean, commit to limit my purchases, and today together we'll do this. And so that's an especially good way to have it in writing. Just the way in the corporate world we have planning meetings every year. How many, of course, in the financial service industry, how many seminars are you going to do? How many podcasts are you going to do? how much stuff are you going to sell? And, you review it with your manager every quarter, et cetera. But in other jobs, you do that too. You have goals. So why not have commitment goals in your relationship for money? So your question was about next, when there's one person has a money person and the other is hands off, what should we do?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, also, I was wondering, what are some of the biggest financial mistakes that most couples make?
Oh, well, yeah. Well, we talked about that a little bit already, hiding things from each other, just not having a plan, thinking more short term instead of longer term on their finances. And, because most couples, if you get together when you're younger, you're going to earn more money over time, but you're also going to have, sort of your financial life cycle. So, you have, you first get together, you're saving money and you get a house, then you have kids, then you're thinking about tuition, then retirement. So, the financial needs and wants are going to change as you progress through normal life cycle. And so you got to start thinking about that soon in advance. Having a plan is always better.
Absolutely. And I love the concept of the commitment letter in your book. And oftentimes people are like, well, if I write down these goals, if I don't stick exactly to them, then I'm doomed, right? Or like I just feel super bad. But I also feel like sometimes you can kind of make it more of a reach goal, and then maybe you'll expect that, hey, we're probably not going to exactly get to this, but as long as we can get close, then things are going to improve overall in the long run. So I think that point is very well taken. And yeah, kind of moving along here. So in my experience working with married couples, and you've probably seen this a lot too, usually one spouse is the one that handles all the finances, and the other tends to take a more of a hands-off approach. Why does that division of the financial roles tend to happen in a marriage? And how can the hands-on spouse make sure that the spouse that delegates is staying in the loop on everything?
Sometimes it relates to personality types. If somebody's a driver or analytic, they want to be in control, they want to keep track of the numbers. If someone's an amiable, they don't want to fight, they want to just go along with everything. But sometimes it's cultural. In certain cultures, the man always handles the money and the woman doesn't. And other times it's habits of families. If that's what, your family did, the sort of the gender roles, then that's what you tend to follow. So it could be any of those reasons.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's really fascinating because I've been seeing a lot of articles lately, like in the Wall Street Journal, they had one the other day talking about a lot of those intra-family financial roles are shifting. Like you mentioned, in a lot of cases, it was cultural, but also sometimes it was gender-based, based on how they themselves were raised. And so, often times, the man was the one that was handling the financial decisions. But actually now it's not just that the woman is in the relationship is handling more financial decisions, but oftentimes is handling most of the financial decisions. And oftentimes, especially when it comes to the shopping sides of things, women oftentimes have more of the power and the say in the relationship. But also nowadays, it's also for bigger purchases like homes and cars and things of that nature. And it's becoming an increasingly important part of the conversation. But to kind of take a step back in the timeline here for a second, let's talk about a couple that has just gotten engaged, right? So a lot of folks, including a lot of financial advisors, recommend getting a prenup, which can outline, kind of the protocol of how things are going to be divvied up if you guys were to get a divorce in the future. Even though a lot of folks recommend getting one in a lot of cases, would you say that you recommend it, and can it sometimes create unnecessary tension in the relationship?
That's a good question, but let me go back and answer the other part two of your other questions. How to keep the second spouse in the loop? I would say you need to gently insist. It's really important that you have a shared budget and that both parties know what bills are due, when. I mean, sometimes people get sick, have accidents, even die suddenly. I have a friend whose husband died suddenly at 58. Right now, I have a friend in acute care and she can't move her legs or arms or speak, you know? So some people set up their bills to pay all automatically. Sometimes people, you get the paper bill, but then you pay it online. It's really important that both spouses know what's going on, because it's still cold out. You don't want the power to be turned off and lose heat, etc. So really important to keep the second spouse in the loop. And as far as a prenup, I'd say it depends. If it's a second marriage and there's kids or property involved, you probably need one. If there's a lot of investments or assets, or especially if there's debt held by one or both individuals, I'd say yes. But for a young couple in love without outsized assets or debt, they should have transparency through a discussion like the one in my book. Have a thorough discussion, and then there should be trust, and they should proceed with their marriage without one. I think it's always ideal if you can avoid the prenup, especially at the beginning of a relationship, as you said, for trust purposes.
That makes a lot of sense. So there's definitely a dichotomy between, whether you guys are younger, and if it's your first marriage or second marriage, maybe it's something that is perhaps more necessary. So I think that's really important for a lot of folks to keep in mind. But you also talked about, a young couple being in love. And when it comes to newlywed couples, they are in the honeymoon phase. They're still in that euphoric time, just in the wake of their marriage there. And eventually, they settle down, they're in their house, and, they kind of start to settle into the routine of life, right? And then they realize, hey, we should probably start planning for our financial future and get our financial goals in order. And so they end up seeking out a financial advisor, which is a great first step to take to get all those things in check. And so I'm curious, what are some of the things that you recommend that people do before that initial meeting with their first financial advisor to make sure that conversation is as productive as possible?
Well, first I'd say, as far as picking an advisor, first, do you have a family member or friend that's pretty savvy that you could rely on for this role? Second, interview a few different candidates. See if they really listen to your needs and your concerns and priorities, or do they immediately have advice without listening? If they immediately have advice or solutions for you, I'd say skip them and move on. Also ask for references. I would call 2 or 3 of the references and say, why do you like this person? What did they do beyond allocating your investments that inspired your trust? And to advisors, talk to both spouses. Sometimes, I had a client who worked for an architecture firm that had a non-working wife. Well, I shouldn't say that. She had 2 kids and she worked part-time at the church. But when I met with him, they didn't have any life insurance and they didn't really have a financial plan. And he liked my ideas, but he wouldn't move forward. And then I finally was able to set up a meeting with the spouse, and, I wore a high collared shirt and made sure that I was very professional, because I didn't want her to think I was flirting with him. This is a business arrangement. This isn't anything else. And when she understood, then they went forward. But, a non-working spouse can have veto power that you don't know about. That's sort of the objection you don't hear as a financial advisor. And I'd also say, there used to be something called salary.com that had the value of a housewife. I found a more modern update on that from insure.com. It says the value of a housewife is $116,000 for the 55 hours a week he or she works and the 18 jobs you must do to keep the household and the kids running. So, you know, those are kinds of things to think about both on the household side and on the advisor side. Is when you're planning, you're not just planning to replace one income or to make sure income from one person. It's all the activities and services the other spouse is providing to keep your household running.
That's incredibly well said. That's an excellent point. My mom was a stay-at-home mom for a portion of my childhood, and I think that it's such an underappreciated role. A lot of folks do appreciate the value that stay-at-home moms and dads bring to the table, but it's so much harder than it seems. And $116,000, I would argue it should be $116 million for probably what I had to put my mom through when I was a crazy kid. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then, to your point on veto power, oftentimes it seems the spouse that is the delegator that's not involved in the finances is the one that usually has more of the veto power when it comes to picking a financial advisor. So I think, making sure they're all on the same page, that they're all in the loop on, what's going on, and that both spouses like the new financial advisor, I think is really key to making sure that it's a long-term relationship that they can stick with over time.
Agreed.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Nina, honestly, this has been a really, really great discussion, and I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today. I learned a lot, and I certainly hope our viewers did too. To everyone watching out there, please make sure you go out and get Nina's brand new book, The Financial Forevermore Workbook, available now on Amazon or at your nearest bookstore. Thanks so much for your time today, Nina.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining us for this episode of the Simplify Your Financial Life podcast, for this awesome conversation with Nina Needleman, the author of the Financial Forevermore Workbook, available now on Amazon. And I highly recommend that you go and check out her really great website, personalfinancewhisperer.net, where you can check out Nina's insights into personal finance as well as on philanthropy. Thanks so much.